Monome Ansible running kria is by far my favourite sequencer for eurorack, being very straightforward and minimal to use and program, with the ability of getting complex and interesting results quickly and easily. It's incredibly playful for a sequencer, while also allows for deeper programming and composition, with its ability to save and recall presets that also makes it excellent for live performance. Kria is one of 3 apps that will come loaded on a newly bought Ansible from Monome. We also need a grid to program and play it. To start off with, I'll go over its basic functions before going through its more advanced uses. I've created a really basic patch to demonstrate how it works, using 2 mangroves as oscillators running through a QMMG in low pass gate mode, which then goes through a mimeophone, which I'm just using for a bit of reverb. I'm using maths for basic envelope shapes to gate each voice. I've tuned it so that the mangroves are both just in tune together. On the module panel, we have 4 channels of gate and CV pairs, going from top down 1 to 4. On the left, we've got our clock input for use with external clock pseudo triggers, and we've also got a reset input on the right for resetting every loop back to its first step. This is where your grid plugs in. When you turn it on for the first time, or start a new pattern, it should look like this. The 4 keys on the bottom left of the grid correspond to the 4 channels of gate and CV on the module, from left to right. Whichever one is brightly lit is the one we've got selected, so currently we've got channel 1 selected. In the middle of the bottom row on the grid, there's 4 pages where we can edit parameters. The first one that we've got currently selected is the gate page, which gives us a kind of overview of where all gates are at per channel at any given time, going top down 1 to 4. The bright lights moving from left to right show you their movement relating to division and direction, which is currently at a 1 to 1 with the internal clock moving from left to right. And we can also see where they are relative to one another. Currently all channels are in sync. The dimly lit keys show what area is looping. So currently we've got from 1 to 6 looping for every channel. On this page we can turn gates on and off on any channel like this. This is the second edit page, which is where we enter our notes. I have it set up so that notes and gates are in sync, so that when I push any of the keys, a corresponding gate will also be selected. This behavior can be configured, which I'll explain later, but it's really important to make sure that you have it configured so that it will act the way that you want it to. So make sure you watch that part of the video and read through the online manual to understand properly. The notes go from low to high from the 7th row up. The notes are quantized to whatever scale we've got set, which I'll show in a bit. The lowest note depends on what we've set our root note as and whatever we've tuned our oscillator to. The third page along is for editing octaves, which we can do per step, going from the lowest octave on the 7th row going up, just like the note page, and we have a 6 octave range. It's set by default to be the lowest note of whatever we tuned our oscillator to. The first row up the top here lets us set the overall octave, which you can shift on the fly. You can make the octaves jump up or down using this. The fourth edit page is where we can adjust gate length. From the second row down, we can set different lengths per step, from short up the top to long down the bottom. The top row also lets us set the gate range, from short on the left to long on the right. There are two more pages under the two keys on the bottom right of the grid. This one here, second from the end, is the scale page. Here we can save up to 16 custom program scales with 6 intervals each, and these are accessible under the 16 dim lit keys on the bottom left. The right side of this page here displays our intervals, which we can edit on the fly for live transposition that can become a part of our performance. This row here is our starting point, which sets what our root note is. Where it currently is whatever we've tuned our oscillator to. It can ascend by semitone intervals with every key space to the right. The next note in our scale can be selected in the row above, with every row on this page corresponding to the notes back on the note page. So, for example, this note here on the second row is what sets the second row here on the note page. Each row is relative to the note below, starting on the far left being the same note. With every key space to the right ascends a semitone. So currently we're going a whole tone between two notes. Here we've got a tone and a half, two whole tones, and so on, going all the way up, with each step above being relative to the last. This one here is a whole tone above this one is a semitone above this one, and so on. It's very easy to put together any scale. There are some more parameters that can be set on this page up here, but I'll go over that a bit later. The final page that is selected with the bottom right key is where we can choose between 16 different pattern save slots. I'll talk about saving later in the video, but to change to a different pattern, simply press a different key in the top row. There's also a meta sequence functionality accessible through this page, where you can sequence patterns to change, kind of like a song mode on a groove box. I don't really use this function that much though, and there's already another great video that explains how to do this, so I'll link it below for you. There are 3 more keys lit on the bottom row that I haven't spoken about yet. These are the modifiers that can be applied to any of the edit pages. We can select a page and hold down one of these to modify the sequencing of each parameter. The one on the left allows us to set the start and end points of a loop. We hold it down and press 2 keys in any row, and the parameter will loop between the columns of whichever 2 keys we pressed. Gates, notes, octaves, and all can be set to play out with different loop lengths and positions depending on your configuration. Holding this key down also allows us to mute each channel, which will stop it from sending any gates and will hold the note CV at its last triggered value. We simply hold this key down and press a channel key from the bottom left to mute that channel. The middle of the 3 modifier keys is where we set different divisions. Like the loop modifier, this can be set to divide different parameters individually depending on configuration. Holding down this key dimly illuminates the second row. From left to right, we can set different divisions, starting at a 1 to 1 on the left, then dividing by whatever column number you're on up to 16 on the right. So, say we wanted to repeat a note 2 times before moving to the next, or hold it for 2 pulses depending on how you look at it. While on the note page, we hold down this key, at first making sure that the channel we want is selected on the bottom left. We press the second key on the dimly lit row. Here it is divided by 4. want to make the gates trigger at different division, we press the gate page key, hold the division modifier key, and select a different division, like this, which is now following the same division as the nodes. We can also do this with octave and gate length pages. The right of the three modifier keys brings up probability, which, like the last two, can be set to any of the sequence parameters in the same way as loop and division. This modifier lets us program the probability of moving or taking no action for a sequence step of whichever parameter. I'll demonstrate with note parameters here on the second channel. So holding this key, the four center rows of each column of the grid acts like a fader, controlling the probability of a parameter changing to its next program value when the step is reached. The default is set to take no action 100% of the time. The row below sets it to occur with 50% probability. So you can hear there on some of those steps it's repeating the same note value as the last. You can change that to 25% no value. So you can hear it's only changing 25% of the time. We can also set this at 0, which basically just disables it for that step. So you can imagine that this gets very interesting very quickly when we use all three of the modifiers together. Next, I'm going to talk about extended parameters. There are 3 more pages that are nested underneath the first 3 of the main edit pages. To access them, we double press the first one. Brings up our ratchet page under the gate page. I'll just set some gates to show you how it works. On this page we can set an additional gate to trigger within each step, being able to add up to 5 additional triggers per step per channel. Make sure that you've got the channel that you want to edit selected, so in this case channel 1. To add an instant ratchet, press one of the keys above the step you want to add it to, like this. This first key above gives you a ratchet divided by 2, the next above that divided by 3, all the way up to 5. You can add or remove ratchets in between freely to create more patterns, with each dimly lit key in between being a rest. Pressing any of the keys turns that step on and off. And because whatever the highest one set to on also sets the division, we also have the dimly lit keys in the first and the 7th rows to allow for adding or subtracting steps without adding triggers. So to demonstrate, to remove the last pulse from a 5 ratchet pulse that we've got happening now, while keeping the others active, we press the 7th key under that steps column. You can do it the other way around too, so if we set 4 to be our division, we press the key in the first row above to take it up to 5 without adding in that step. It can be a little tricky to get your head around this behaviour, but I think it's good for being able to quickly create detailed rhythmic patterns on the fly. We can also long press the first row to fill the steps within a division, or we can use the 7th row below to clear. This also allows for faster programming. Navigating to the note page and pressing the note page key again brings up an alt note page. This works in a kind of additive way, where using the same way to enter notes as on the main page adds a new value on top of the current interval that is also relative to our scale settings. So if we add a note on the alt note page with the second interval, which is in this case a whole note, as referring back on our scale page. This note adds a whole tone on top of the note underneath on the main note page. Increasing to the next interval will add, in this case, another semitone. Once you reach above the highest note set on the scale, the alt note will wrap around without changing octave, but continuing to add intervals relative to the steps set in our scale. Rather than trying to remember what note it is in regards to a Western way of music theory thinking, I think it helps to regard the different intervals as numbers in a sort of modular arithmetic way of thinking, which funnily enough has nothing to do with modular synths except in this context. Look that one up. The really cool thing about this is to remember that each sequence parameter can be set to have different loop lengths and start endpoints, as well as different divisions. You can easily sequence key change, root note, or arpeggio type movements by dividing the alt note separately to the main note, depending on your configuration settings again. So, for example, here is a simple looped melody. Now, if we enter into the alt note page and change the division to 8, and then enter some different intervals, the root note position will shift after the melody plays through twice in each position at every 8 pulses. You can create some really interesting melodic and harmonic movement with some considered programming, which takes this far beyond a simple 16-note sequencer. Returning to the octave page and pressing the octave page key again brings up a slew page where we can slide between different notes. You can set the length of the slide depending on which one you've got set. Again, this can be looped, divided, and have its probably set freely. Going back to the scale page, we have a few other options. The top 4 rows in the first column relate to clocking tracks with the monome teletype, so I won't go over that here, but you can use them as mutes if you want to, since they're expecting to receive a clock from something that's not there. The second column changes the ratcheting behaviour per channel. Pushing this key enables the notes as well as other parameters in our sequence to follow whatever ratcheting pattern we've set, rather than on each clock step. So here we have in the first channel just a straight divide by 4 ratcheting pattern. The notes are still just following the regular clock intervals, but if we go to our scale page again and select this option, we can see the notes here are following the ratcheting pattern, which can be really cool for creating legato type effects. However, the gate lengths here are sort of blend into each other between ratchets, so if you do want a staccato effect, make sure that you use a trigger attack release input rather than an input that holds gate or slews. Back on the scale page, from the 4th column to the 8th, we have a group of keys that allow for changing direction of each track. The first one, selected by default, plays the track from left to right. The second one plays from right to left. We can track that behaviour either here on the note page, or if we go to the master gate page, we can see all of them are at any given time. The next option plays a sequence forwards and then backwards. The fourth option drunkenly stumbles randomly backwards or forwards. The fifth and final option is fully random. One really important thing to be wary of is the sync configuration setup, as I think this is the main source of confusion that many people face when they first start using kria. We can access these settings by holding down either of the first two keys on the module itself. The first key is related to whether or not different timing parameters are in sync by shared divisions, while the second is related to whether or not notes and gates are in sync when editing steps, and whether or not loop points are in sync. When holding down the first key, the top half gives us control over timing of the internal clock, which I'll explain in a bit, while the bottom half has three shapes that can be toggled off and on, dim being off and bright being on. The hollow square shape on the left gives us the option to tie together clock divisions between notes and gates. We'd turn this on if we wanted each note to always stay in sync to the gate in the same channel. Changing the divisions of notes will also change the division of gates and vice versa. Turning this off allows separate clock divisions between note and gate. So say we wanted a note to repeat 4 times before moving to the next. We can divide the note by 4 while keeping the gates as 1. I like keeping this off, which is all other parameters still have their own division settings. The small square down the bottom, when off, sets changes we make to happen instantaneously, or when this is on, they can be in sync to restart whenever that parameter's clock restarts. Remember that every parameter can have separate clock divisions and loop points. I like instant changes, so I keep this off too. On the bottom right, we have 3 options for choosing which parameters share the same clock divisions, including note and gate, across all 4 channels. They can be totally out of sync, which is what it currently is with the top and bottom dim, or be synced per channel with the top key lit, or be in sync across all channels with the bottom 4 keys lit. I like to keep these parameters off too, which allows for some really interesting complex rotating patterns that is central to how I compose. Now, holding down the second key, the hollow square on the left gives us the option of whether or not the editing of gates and notes are in sync or not. Leaving this on allows for instantaneously turning a gate and note per step on or off on either gate or note edit page, which makes for entering note and gate patterns with both active steps and rests quickly and intuitively, treated as a whole in a combined gesture. Turning this option off means the gates and notes edited separately, meaning we have to change between pages to edit each, but allows for creating individual gate and note patterns separately. But if you're a guitarist come ambient modular synthesis like me, then you'll probably want a note to play when you tell the note to play, so I like to keep this on, while still having the ability to separate divisions between gates and notes that I set up with button 1 options. To the right of the hollow square, we've got 3 options for loop sync behaviour. With nothing lit, all tracks and parameters have separate loop points, each of which can be changed on the fly. So for example, you could make the gates on one track loop between steps 2 to 5, while the notes are looping between steps 4 to 9, and have a gate length pattern play out over all 16 steps. Just remember that if you do want to have different loop points between note and gate, you'll have to turn the note and gate edit sync off, which was the hollow square under button 1. With the top single block lit, all parameters within a channel share the same loop points, but each channel can have its own loop, making for easy creation of polymetric patterns between channels while still being able to know where we're at. I like this setting so that I don't get too lost with what's going on. Of course, you could also use the reset input too. With the top square and the bottom squares lit, all tracks and parameters share the same loop points, if you didn't want to use polymeter for some reason. Under the second button, we've also got 3 squares in the top left. These just change the brightness of the keys, which can be useful if you're playing it in a dim or bright space. And also on the bottom right, we've got this little square, which gives us access to a tuning mode, which I've never really used, but it can allow for non-12-tet tunings and scales. The button on the bottom of the module, when pressed, brings up 8 different preset banks, each containing 16 4-channel pattern slots, and is accessible by pressing any of the keys on the left. So here we've got different banks. We can draw these different patterns on the right to help you remember which one's which. To save a pattern, we just long press on the bank slot we want to save it to. It will save over whatever you've got saved in there already, so be careful when selecting the one you want. The current active one will always be lit up to help. To exit without doing anything, just push the button again. We can also long press this button to change between Earthsea and Metaphysics apps, but for this tutorial I'm just talking about kria. So I hope that all makes sense and clears up some of the confusion around this sequencer and serves as an entry point to anyone who might be interested in incorporating it into their creative practices. Please feel free to ask any questions in the comments below, write to me, or discuss it on the Lines forum. I'm happy to take requests on making any other videos to do with kria or my 2 systems too. If you'd like to hear this sequencer in use, please check out some of my music linked below, which was all written using kria, or subscribe to my channel. I'm just starting out and want to do more one-take improvisations, playing my modular with kria like a standalone instrument rather than just a music production tool. Much love and take care.